Hi, everyone, and good evening. My name is Britt Russert. I am the executive editor of the Massachusetts Review. I have been in this position for a little over a year, and I can say that so far, one of the things I'm liking most about the job is getting to share good news with our contributors, from notifying writers that we want to publish their work to picking nominations for external honors and awarding the Massachusetts Review's annual prizes. So tonight we are here to celebrate Caroline Harper New, who is this year's recipient of MR's Anne Halley Poetry Prize. Caroline's poem, My Love for Geography is an Act of Mourning, appeared in the summer 2025 issue of MR and was selected for this honor by our poetry editors, Abby Chibitnoy and Nathan McClain. I did want to take a moment to thank Abby and Nathan for their labor reading for this prize and also for all of the work that they do for the magazine throughout the year. I'm also so pleased that Caroline was able to join us virtually, which means that while we will miss out on having the chance to meet in person and having dinner together, which is always a really lovely experience, it's a trade-off. It's a good one here because it means that we get the opportunity to share her work with more of our readers who can join us from near, far, and everywhere in between. So I want to take a moment now to introduce Nathan McClain, who will tell you a bit more about the Halley Prize and introduce you to Caroline. Nathan McClain is the author of two poetry collections, Previously Owned, published in 2022, and Scale, published in 2017, both from Four Way Books. A recipient of fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the Frost Place, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, his poetry and prose have recently appeared in several places, including the New England Review, the Hopkins Review, Poetry Northwest, and the anthology Breaking into Blossom, Poems with Extraordinary Endings. Nathan also serves as the poetry editor for the Massachusetts Review. So now I'll turn it over to Nathan.
Thanks so much, Britt. Wonderful to be here with everyone tonight. Thank you all for taking the time out to be here with us and to celebrate Caroline's work. And we're incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend a bit of your Wednesday evening with us. My name, as Britt mentioned, is Nathan McClain. I serve as one of the poetry editors of the Massachusetts Review. A big thank you first to our incredibly hardworking and seamlessly tireless staff for organizing the details around this reading. Our executive editor, Britt Russert, business manager, Emily Wojcik, managing editor, Eddie Clifford, and our editorial assistant, G. Siegel. Thank you to our art department, and a big welcome also to our new production designer, Rebecca Nymark, who is responsible for the broadsides that are part of the prize that happens here this evening as well, and which you should absolutely order and display in your home. And also thank you, as always, to Abigail Chibitnoy, my co-pilot in all things poetry for the magazine, for her sharp eye and constant editorial support. Now, while our reading takes place virtually, the Massachusetts Review normally operates out of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which acknowledges that it was founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Pecumtuck Nation on the land of the Norwottuck community. We begin with gratitude for nearby waters and lands. We recognize these lands and waters as important relations with which we are all interconnected and depend on to sustain life and well-being. The Pecumtuck had connections with these lands for millennia, over 400 years of colonization. When the Pecumtuck peoples were displaced, many joined their Algonquin relatives to the east, south, west, and north. That includes the Mashpee and Aquinnah, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Narragansett, Mohegan, Pequot, Mohican communities, and the Abenaki and other nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. These Native peoples still maintain connections and relationships of care for these lands today. And we want to acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Amherst is a land grant university as part of the Morrill Land Grant Act. Portions of the land from 82 Native nations west of the Mississippi were sold to provide the resources to found and build this university. As an active step toward decolonization, we encourage you to learn more about the Native nations whose homelands UMass Amherst now resides on and the indigenous homelands on which you live and work. We also invite you to deepen your relationship to these living lands and waters. Now, for a little history about the prize itself, for 25 years, Anne Halley was the poetry editor of MR, had long association with the English department, and was the author of three distinctive volumes of verse and many prize-winning stories, while enjoying a long career as a beloved teacher in the US and abroad. The Anne Halley Poetry Prize is co-sponsored by the Massachusetts Review and the English Department of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. A prize of $500 is awarded annually for the best, quote unquote, best poem, which we, of course, understand is deeply subjective, to appear in the preceding year of MR as chosen by the two poetry editors and at times a member of the broader literary community. The prize poet is invited to give a spring reading in Amherst, or virtually if a reading in person can't be made possible. This year's recipient and the poet we've all gathered to hear this evening is Caroline Harper New. Caroline Harper New is a poet, artist, and scholar from Southwest Georgia. She is author of A History of Half Birds, published by Milkweed Editions in 2024, recipient of the Ballard Spar Prize and the Housatonic Book Award, and If I Call This Cave a Garden, which is forthcoming from Yes Yes Books this year, recipient of the Vinyl 45 Chapbook Prize, and her practice spans poetry, ethnography, sculpture, painting, film, translation, and the tendons in between. She holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Michigan, where she is currently a PhD student in anthropology, studying human, non-human entanglements, ruptures in temporality, and death and extinction in wetlands. It's funny. Last year, I opened my introductory remarks with a similar anecdote, but very early on in any given semester, I will often share with my workshop students that poets, in particular among writers, only ever write about two subjects, love and loss. That while there may be a myriad of subcategories that might be mused upon in one's poetry, very often those subcategories fall along the lines of the aforementioned subjects and interests in permanence and impermanence. I say, in fact, that the very act of writing a poem is one's attempt to fix to the page an experience, feeling, revelation, or memory that, even as you're drafting, is changing in the way you remember or were affected by it. This complication, a poem's nuanced exploration of the divided self, is most immediately captured in the title of New's winning poem, My Love for Geography is an Act of Mourning. Love, mourning, made to share the same space alongside one another in a singular sentence. Love, which attempts to make the beloved, be it person, place, or object, stay, to remain unchanged, and loss, which recognizes that it won't, that it can't. The poem opens with an interrogation of language itself, asserting that, quote, bereaved is more forgiving than bereft, end quote. The words look similar, to be sure, and that appears to be part of what the poem intends to explore via sight and sound. Both words are concerned with loss, but somehow differently. They remain linked in a kind of etymological family, like daughter, which in this poem rhymes with water rather than, say, mother. And throughout, a reader notes these slippages in the poem's music, these near rhymes, some more closely resembling each other than others. Leaves and knees, fingers and jerk, scalp and slap, cheeks and sweet, sugar never scared, womb and wound. The pain and grief, which also somewhat rhyme, in that they transcend the addressed you of the poem to become the wound I hold in my body. We all know loss, large and small. Why New's poem resonates with us is that it's a familiar feeling and experience. I can say so firsthand. As you likely know, Hampshire College, where I've worked for 8 years, is closing. It's in December. It's one of a number of small liberal arts tuition-dependent institutions of higher ed that are closing. But this reading isn't about my grief, simply that grief is a thing we share. Finally, and I cannot say that the poet necessarily intended this particular comparison, when I read the close of My Love for Geography is an Act of Mourning, I can't help but think of the late Stanley Kunitz's poem, The Portrait, which details a memory in which its youthful speaker comes, quote, down from the attic with the pastel portrait in hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache, end quote. The speaker's father, who, the poem reveals in its opening lines, my mother never forgave for killing himself. At seeing the portrait, the mother, quotes, ripped it into shreds and slapped me hard. The poem closing, quote, in my 64th year, I can feel my cheek still burning. Bereavement, the slap, the sting that never left, how even attempting to fix such grief to the page can feel something like overwhelm, like drowning or burial, water having gone from, quote, my knees, end quote, quote, up to my chin, end quote. And as such, New's poem, which feels so keenly aware of how music can yoke or bind, closes with hearing, which serves as yet another way of recognizing familiarity, a resemblance that only blood could explain. What gets passed down or along, the waves, which the speaker can hear now, quote, have your voice, end quote, and which, in turn, tell her, quote, I have your eyes, end quote. It's an honor to have Carolyn here this evening to share more of her music with us. Please help me welcome her, Carolyn Harper New.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And to the whole Massachusetts Review staff. It's such an honor to get this prize. I've been on the other end of judging for a similar prize through Mission Quarterly Review, and there's so much gorgeous work to sort through. So I'm really touched that this poem was selected. I'm going to read from a couple collections today, but I'll start with the winning poem and then go through the collection that it belongs to. So first, we have My Love for Geography is an Act of Mourning. Bereaved is more forgiving than bereft, leaves me between daughter and water, up to my knees. Maybe you looked back for me, but I was already here. I am, up to my chin. I feel your fingers jerk my scalp into braids. Slap my cheeks when I stole the sweets, and you sent me to fetch more sugar, more salt, the sting that never left the womb, the wound I hold in my body. I'm not scared. I hear how the waves have your voice. They say I have your eyes. So this poem comes from a series called If I Call This Cave a Garden, which is being published as a chapbook in September this year. And it's based on the story of Lot in Abrahamic texts, so the Bible, Quran, Torah, told from one of the perspectives of Lot's daughters. And for those unfamiliar with the story, Lot, his wife, and daughters flee the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah just before God destroys them with fiery sulfur. And when his wife looks back, she's turned into a pillar of salt. After which the father and his daughters flee to a cave where they hide, and the story gets darker from there. So the series is a story of obsession as the daughter searches for and communes with her mother through all of these different salt formations and deposits post-mortem. And she also tries to make sense of her grief through the chemical qualities of sulfur. So it's really about a little girl trying to make peace with her mother's death through these fictive scientific logics that she invents. Um, in doing so, she discovers her own body is kind of the living remnant of her mother, which you see come up in the end of this poem. And I'm gonna read about 6 or 7 poems from this collection. that follow the one that I just read. So, have you missed the color red? Mama, you would love living in this cave. It feels like being swallowed by a sea monster. The belly is warm and full of animals who also can't find the mouth. The animals have no eyes, but we are too small to see each other anyways. Mama, the cave would love living inside you. The animals would never go hungry, and I could show you the worms clumped like hair in a drain. The shocks of red you would relish. You never had that luxury, but look at the curtains I've stitched. The ceiling is vaulted with Gothic ribs, and the walls glow with gypsum glitter. Little streams run through the tiles, and when the animals spit slow stalactites from the ceiling, their saliva carves new caves in the floor, and our house multiplies. You would love it, Mama. Even if you can't find the mouth, there is always another way out. This next poem is called Loom, and it was also printed in Massachusetts Review alongside the winning poem. Loom. I used to have a house full of sisters and a dress that smelled like oranges. I used to have a braid for every hand in my hair. My fingers twitch when I forget, and my last sister spits on my baby hairs before school. She yanks me into her dress and fumbles into our mother's, not the green one. Do I remember? Smell can summon memories that would otherwise die. The neighbors didn't want the stench of my hand-me-downs, so I set the dress on fire. It burned a thick blue flame in the roof. I burned the house to the ground with our father inside. Do you remember? I burned our father to the ground with myself inside, my mother inside. My sister says every time a memory is recalled, it shifts. A shadow turns sister, sister turns river, and vice versa. A hand on a knife, vice versa, vice versa. A kaleidoscope is just mirrors and a hand to keep it spinning. My sister says my fingers twitch. Next poem is Enough to Fill 2 Moons and Then Some. When the gods scattered to the stars, Virgo, see there, was the last daughter to leap. I wish I'd remembered your telescope to unswirl the sidewinders from the horizon, to spy on Mercury flirting the dog star. I could have heaved it from the roof if I wasn't scared of a periwinkled spine. I'm not scared to know that astronomers have found water on other planets, blinking blue like giant squid eyes through the inky space. If humans are 60% water, water must be 60% humans. 60% of planets must be infested with hominids inscribing Hammurabi in the moon rocks, hoisting telescopes to their rooftops to watch our desert eye blink, blink, and swallow the humans hiding inside. If space humans build houses too, there could be a house brimming with sisters. I could have 60 sisters and a mother for every planet. Next, a lesson on volcanoes. After a million years, drought can still be measured by the salt layered in the rock. The ground can grow as full as Sinai or Vesuvius. In school, we mold salt dough into peaks and drag our fingernails from mouth to putty earth, engraving our own choice of fault lines. I emboss my mountain with gardens and gazelles, cut out families to pick the rosemary stippled in the soil. I sunder streams in the sticky geography until the teacher reminds me that's not the point. Add 2 spoons of salt and 2 drops of dye intended to be red. Quickly, an ounce of vinegar and back up, run. This I remember. I stay. Embed my hands in the soft topography as heat unburies from the heart. Blue. And here's a brief interlude to say that ancient Sodom and Gomorrah were located near the Dead Sea, so likely in modern day Jordan or Palestine. And it's really impossible to write about cities being destroyed and people forced to flee and children losing parents without also connecting that to what's going on today. And those parallels are something that emerged in this project. Um, Actually, it was many years after this project happened, but in the editing, those things kind of started to connect. So you'll see that show up too in these following poems. I rub eyes from embers. I was not always desert and cave. I was birdsong. I was garden. I was green that unfolds tiny leaves and feeds the small things. What does it mean to be soft and alive in a new land? Little moths unfurl their mouths to suck the salt from my wrists. Their false velvet eyes shed on my fingertips, and I cannot put them back. Sometimes I wish I'd look back at the fire falling from the sky, the hot ruckus of our city arranged in the outline of my lashes, every night still fluttering. If I teach tomatoes to climb stalagmites, I can call this cave a garden. Imagine orchards rising in Corinthian columns, apricots, apples, peaches, pears, and plums. Any fruit with a pit contains cyanide, which is really just a type of salt. Think of all the apple seeds required. Some mammals can tolerate skunk cabbage and milkweed and nightshade and hellebore, but a handful of hollyberries kills a human. Did you know that, Mama? The rules depend on the shape of the teeth, which means you could kill a wolf with an onion. Onions are easy to grow. They're hardy and erupt pale green flowers. Imagine that, Mama. A celadon carpet of flowers swelling through the mouth. And I'll end the readings from this collection with this poem before moving on. Salt Lick. Here, I think I found you, squared to earth, small enough to hold. I rub my fist over you to loosen your gems. Jagged birds I tongue into my gums, stuffing them back to wet eggshells. I know it's you from the skein of rose-ruffed veins, the pull in my spine when I carry you each year to the field, where I share you with the rabbits, the gazelle, the fox, the moon, the wind, the mud, the worms, the dust, and always the cattle whose cud I smear from your unhewn face. I rub my cheeks in your sun-cracked shoal and wrung my tongue back and forth like sandpaper to see who will blister first. Each year softens your contours from block to bas relief. Weathered by water or wanting, who's to say whether rain or mouth has carved each gibbous hollow? Which tongues caressed your calla-lilied flesh, creviced like gums freed of teeth, or deserts gleaned of the bodies they've held? Each year, the salt lick caves into a new anatomy, a memory of falling inward, nowhere to go but the ground and the mouths of all your children. Those poems were all from If I Call This Cave a Garden, which the collection of the winning poem belonged to. But now I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to leave this world of the ancient Levant and read from my collection, A History of Half-Birds. I'll be reading from the physical copy. And this is set mainly in the Georgia, Florida area. And the poems I've selected each kind of tell their own stories, so I won't give too much of a preface. But it's interspersed with a series called Field Notes, which is kind of a crossover from my anthropology practice, where I take ethnographic field notes um, as I'm doing research. So I'm going to begin and end with field notes for this reading. Let's see. I started writing these field notes because I have a really hard time writing small, and they were my challenge to myself to take poems that I thought were bad and whittle them down until I found the parts in them that were worth remaining in the poems and ending up with these tiny poems. So this is Field Notes on Hydrangeas. Blue is a sign of acidity in the soil. My lover from Queens hears not soil but soul. My slower tongue shows him what to bury. Pennies, or rusted nails, or lemon rind. Control is a delicate science. I tried to convince him the pH does not indicate pollution, but I'm not so sure. Geophagy is the practice of eating dirt. Women in Georgia are known for their gardens. Elephant Mother. Every year there's a flood in this Georgia Delta, sometimes two or three. I know a woman who rode to the hospital to give birth. I know a woman named Carol who instead opened a home for elephants. Carol spent years searching for the perfect land, then years more to find an elephant. She prepared a series of thick-walled pipes, driven 4 feet deep in the clay, enforced with a steel-top rail, and waited until Bo finally arrived. The circumference of his ankles, 5 feet plus, was much bigger than the female she'd prepared for, and so Carol began all over, refencing her 100 acres of thick swamp and blue spring and cornfield for her 34-year-old circus retiree. Now, the biggest concern? He disappears into the Georgia pines, and not even Carol can find him. Flashlight prying through the night swamps, nettles seizing at her calves. Asian elephants have a lifespan of 48 years in the wild, even less in captivity, of which Carol is acutely aware. What counts as motherhood? For a horse, you must dig a pit 9 feet deep and borrow a tractor to drag it by the ankles, not unlike pulling a stubborn calf from the womb. You can use the same chains. In the case of a hurricane, tie your name around your horse's neck and open the gates. Hope for the best. Carol knows elephants can swim for up to 6 hours, but had anyone ever taught him? She never wanted children. She only wanted to set something free, as she calls Bo, circling the fence in the overgrown dark, checking 2, 3 times each bolt. This next poem is Widdershins. Her hands are in my mouth, when my dentist and I discover our common love of bones. Our professions, both of them, are at odds with the fact that once formed, enamel cannot repair itself. She concerns herself with caramel for the same reason I track the skeletal layout of human fingers in whale flippers, in possum toes. How the alligator split from the flamingo by accident. There is no reason to think dinosaurs weren't also soft and pink, says the paleontologist. After all, our fear of birds is ancient. Hinged ankles, swivel toes, a wishbone. There is no reason to wish ourselves extinct, yet, if left to instinct, humans walk circles counterclockwise. Think of the hippodromes, the middle of the desert. The word for this in witchcraft is widdershins, meaning counter to the sun. Unlucky unless intentional, in which case it's a curse. We used to have a dog that chased shadows in frantic, endless circles until we had to tie him up. Still, one day I pulled from his soft, giddy mouth a songbird, wet and whole and presumably dead. No thumping on the chest or warm sugar water could rouse it. I set it on the fence post while I dug a tiny grave, but when I reached for the body, it was gone. Dancing widdershins can summon the supernatural, defined as beyond scientific understanding. The body was merely in shock. There is no reason to doubt witchcraft, says the paleontologist. We study the past to know the future, he says. And yet our fear is as ancient as the possum in the headlights. The familiarity of those small pink hands. The dentist says I can wait to have this dead tooth pulled from my mouth, as long as I can ignore it. We have a little extra time, so I'm gonna throw in a poem here that I always think is fun to read. If I can find it here. Continues those themes of flooding. It's called If We Stage the Wizard of Oz with Alligators. If we stage the Wizard of Oz with alligators, we have to go big or go home. Dilate the tornado with salt water. Rename it Hurricane Matthew or Ike. The name is unimportant, just make it bigger than anyone's seen. In this scene, twist Dorothy's dress into a heavy tail and roll, the death roll. Rumbling over the rain, ho, she snags a couple fish. Let her eat, like they wouldn't let Judy, and let the rain sweep the whole scene technicolor. Replant Dorothy in a peanut field and don't let the farmer shoot Toto. Dorothy scoops him in her mouth like a tender mother, says the herpetologist on set, who insists a witch can live for 80 million years, but in winter her reflexes dull. She is too slow to skirt the house, the tree, which falls at the nape of her skull. The wicked witch, the wicked witch! Ding dong, Dorothy steals her teeth. Dorothy is washed to sea and hungry. The beaches bared of lions, and the sea crows sunk with oil. Oh my! The good witch crawls from the sewer, and something ruby slips down her throat. There's no place like the Emerald Coast, but the homing instincts of gators break down after 60 miles. Dorothy must find her way to the wonderful wizard who cries, "Pay no attention," and demands proof of melting. The wizard says, "Click your teeth 3 times." There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home anymore, anymore. But keep this part the same. Make the wizard a man with a human hand to yank the curtain over his eyes, circled by gators and Dorothy with twice the teeth. So when the lizards of Oz ask who's to blame for their bayous boiling, swamp fires roiling, the storms that drag them to Texas, or the trees that snap on their necks, consult the herpetologist on set who says there is no such thing as a feeding frenzy. Gators are coordinated when they face the current. Arrange their jaws side by side so not one human escapes. That poem takes its inspiration from the many ways that alligators have ended up in the news around the Gulf Coast surrounding hurricanes, whether being swept to Texas or found under trees. Check our time. I think we'll do 4 more here. This one is called Notes on Devotion. A man by the name of Skinner becomes famous for keeping caged pigeons whom his clock feed or starves at random. Their tiny twitching heads exaggerate until one bird swings its weight like a pendulum. One turns counterclockwise 3 times. One aims its beak to the corner and sings, "My love, let me break," which has nothing to do with the cage. The point is, the pigeons invented their own religion, aimed litanies at an empty sky until something broke and something was mechanical. I still hold the shape of his skull to my sleeping chest and call his name over and over to the wrong man. Though the manna that fell was nothing but accident, it conditioned the birds to aim weapons. The accuracy with which they pecked the homing radar was unswayed by Skinner's pistols or pressure chambers. The centrifugal loop that swung their bird bones broken until their hearts were locked in place. Remember, lockets used to be a sign of mourning, stuffed with hair or cutouts of a lover's eyes. I've seen love pecked to death and the gods sculpted from that accident. I've aimed my head to the corners of the sky and opened my mouth so wide I've thought my beak would break. Like clockwork, I coo, "Let me break my love and skin the feathers from that wound." Religion requires ritual. To do the same thing over and over despite pressure in the skull or pistol to the breast, but I still remember my own young Sunday. The hollow sanctuary where behind the preacher's head a bird flew into the window over and over, and we just kept singing. Okay. This poem returns to that image brought up in the first poem from this collection, which I've been told you can't include the same image twice in the book, but I find myself doing that over and over again, and no one has stopped me yet. So this is called Love Poem for My Bird Dog. I wanted to write a love poem, but it ended up about my bird dog who wouldn't hunt, who only chased shadows round and round the back field until we had to tie him up. Then one day he offered up a mouthful of bird, and I wanted to write about the bird, but this is a love poem. Or it could have been if I wrote about my yellow dog, who once bit my neighbor so badly the police took her away for a month, and my bird dog stopped running circles, stopped eating, went blind with missing her, despite the fact that yellow dog never liked him or even noticed when he died. But this was meant to be a love poem, so Maybe I should write about my black horse, Daisy May, who was tall and fast and mean to everyone but Sunny, the red horse who never left her side, never bit or kicked or broke down the fence to run into the road unless she was following Daisy. She was following Daisy when she climbed from the ditch onto the highway, but being sweet and slow and loyal, could not leap from the blacktop in time. We found Daisy after the accident down the road, chewing grass, unbothered. Let me try again. The black horse, the red horse, the dogs. Perhaps I will write this poem to the bird I pulled from my dog's mouth. How I wrapped it in a wash rag and laid it in a shoebox, tapping its small chest for hours until I had to accept it was dead. How I dug a tiny grave, but when I reached for the body, it was gone. Maybe I'm writing to the shadow of the bird that my dog who wouldn't hunt chased again across the field. You, yes, you, I need you to know I would have kept you and loved you most had you never escaped my hands. Um, this reading began on the theme of mothers, and so these last two poems here will return to an address to mothers. This is called Moon Song for My Mother. My mother says my troubles started with the moon. As a child, I insisted on sleeping on the roof, where the bright crash of waves invaded the nylon cocoon she zipped over my head. She always warned I wouldn't sleep, just like she warned ballet would break all the small bones in my feet. You see, my mother and I wear the same narrow nine, and after each foot surgery, she woke screaming of alligators who wouldn't let go of her pinky toe. She says, you can't inherit all the bad things from me, but it's true. I never sleep. I listen to recordings of humpback whales and arrange my pillow so I can pretend the sound of traffic is the pines. They too sing complex lullabies, rumbling, honking, the occasional crash of metal. In this house, I have an excuse. An animal rattled my ceiling all night long until my landlord installed a small white box. Now, all I hear is tick, 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 and still I cannot sleep. Scientists have mapped whale songs onto musical staffs and determined they're all for love, but it's true. The whales are dying of sound. Propellers and seismic air guns test for oil every 10 seconds for weeks on end. Love song, love song, love song. I am scared of how my mother's pills make her forget things after dark. As a child, I begged her to sing me Old Rugged Cross before bed. The ones with the animals, I said, though they were never in the lyrics. I made it up, she said, each time she woke, screaming in the night. Tonight, I know she is awake when she calls to say, look at the moon. I know she won't remember anything I say, so I say, the alligators have gone to sleep. The whales are safe in their cocoons. Outside, the pine trees tiptoe, mouths pressed to the moon. And then I'll end on another Field Notes poem. Field Notes on Juniper. I am always looking for proof. There in the canyons of El Chorro, the guide pointed to the mountain that once cupped an ocean in its peak. The seafloor stayed put even as fresh rivers carved around it, pushing octopus and urchin toward the sun. We know this now, the guide said, for the juniper that grows along the lips, not the skeletons, the unlucky fish who felt the moon lose her grip on the tides, who carved their shapes in the rock before anyone could name them. There are planets whose own gravity consumes them, and plants I call in Latin for the softness of rhyme. Here I will say them right. Snake root / pine, love flies bleeding.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for those gorgeous, gorgeous poems. A few lines that stick with me are what counts as motherhood. And I was sort of stopped in my tracks. I'm not sure if it was a couplet or a line, but I was bird song, I was garden. And for what it's worth, I love the return of images, and it was really wonderful just to hear the beginning and end of that story across your reading. So thank you so much. I want to thank Caroline. Thank you to everyone who chose an evening of poetry with us in the middle of the week, at the end of the semester. This was mentioned at the beginning of the reading, but just to reiterate, as part of the Halley Prize, we create a special broadside publication of the poem that is selected for this honor, which is then signed by the poet and made available for purchase on our website. This year's broadside was designed by our new production designer, Rebecca Nymark, who did a really beautiful job with it. I think we've already put the link in the chat, but basically you just need to visit our landing page, www.massreview.org. Scroll halfway down on the page. In the left column, you'll see a thumbnail of the broadside and a link that says Purchase Broadsides. And while you're there, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the magazine and or making a donation to support our work. We also have a vibrant Substack, the massachusettsreview.substack.com. So thanks again for joining us. Congratulations again to Caroline on this honor and sending best wishes for the rest of your evening. Bye, everybody.
Bye, thanks for having me.